Chip stocks are falling this morning after President Trump has hinted more targeted tariffs could come to semiconductors in the wake of sweeping levies against China, Canada, and Mexico. We want to bring in John Vinh. He's KeyBanc Capital Markets equity research analyst. John, it's great to have you here. So certainly we're seeing a lot of these chip names caught up in the selling pressure here this morning. Tech, one of the biggest contributors to the declines that we're seeing here shortly after the open. What's your analysis just in terms of how big of an overhang you see these tariffs being to the chip stock sector?
Yeah, it's going to have a pretty significant impact. I see lesser an impact from the cost of chips increasing because of the tariffs. Most of the chips are made in Taiwan, as you know. I think the bigger impact is really going to be the impact on end demand, right? If you think about products that are made in Mexico and in China, it's going to be autos, and then out of China, it's going to be PCs, smartphones, and consumer electronics. So as those prices increase, we think there's probably going to be a negative impact to end demand, and ultimately that's going to flow upstream to all the chip companies.
How does that impact then the manufacturing kind of output that we're expecting to see, and purchase orders to go into some of those consumer electronics in the near term?
Yeah, there really is not going to be much flexibility there. Like there could be a possibility that some of these companies try to move manufacturing into the U.S. to kind of move the assembly of kind of, all these different components. But in terms of moving chip manufacturing around, there really isn't going to be any sort of flexibility there. Foundries, as you know, there's the CHIPS Act in the U.S. and, these fabs in Arizona and Ohio are under construction, but it's going to take years for them to finish.
John, when you take a look at some of the names under pressure here this morning, NVIDIA, Broadcom, Qualcomm, Applied Materials, Micron, ARM, Intel, the list goes on, that is under pressure here following the open. Who's most at risk?
I think it's going to be the guys who are going to be in the auto industry, so all the analog guys like TI, NXP, onsemi come to mind. You think about all the smartphone names. Those names are going to be impacted, because they sell chips that go into the iPhone. So, for example, Qualcomm, Qorvo, Skyworks is going to be impacted there. And then, if you think about the compute guys, right, smartphone, PCs, NVIDIA, AMD, and Intel are all going to be impacted.
And so with all of this in mind, we've also been thinking about the deregulation tariffs aside that are set to come forth and is set to be prioritized by the administration. Are there M&A opportunities that make sense within this industry?
We do think that M&A is going to continue. We think that the activity is going to pick up moderately, but large-scale M&A is still going to be very challenged, right? When you think about large-scale M&A, you're probably going to have to go through China with SAMR approval. So I don't see much of a pickup in large-scale M&A, but I think small, medium-sized M&A certainly could pick up with some of this deregulation going forward.
John, does this at all, the developments here of the last 24, 48 hours, does this at all impact, I was going through your recent 2025 outlook note, there is a lot of reason to be optimistic about this sector. Does this at all change that longer-term view?
No, when we think about kind of our 25 outlook piece, thematically, the names that we like here are going to be ARM, NVIDIA, and onsemi. We do think that there's going to be tailwinds related to the cyclical recovery in the semiconductor industry. We've been correcting for almost 2 years now. We think, inventories point to a recovery in the second half. And then, secularly, we like NVIDIA, and, obviously there's some controversies and some unknowns around what the impact of DeepSeek is, but we still think that they're going to be one of the best positioned companies in AI going forward.
John, I just wonder what you make of some of the executives within this industry and within big tech more largely, and how they are kind of annexing themselves to at least have the ear of the president, knowing some of their own growth trajectories, but also their growth ambitions as well. And it sounds like President Trump is going to weigh meeting with, and already has some meetings on the calendar with Jensen Huang as well, one that took place on Friday at least. What would you like to see result from these conversations as they have the ear of the president?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if you think about NVIDIA, right, they're obviously concerned about, some further repercussions related to China. China's probably under 10% of their revenues these days. It's a lesser impact. But I think if you think about Jensen, his really focus is really just the proliferation of AI. And, I think there's some concerns that, the Trump administration could further restrict exports of chips into China, right? Right now, NVIDIA is allowed to ship a China-compliant product or SKU called the H20. I think the concern is that they potentially could completely restrict all AI chips into China, right? And that obviously could impact the remaining 10% of NVIDIA's revenues. And I think probably something in between would be a preferred resolution from NVIDIA's perspective.
John, thanks so much for taking the time here with us this morning just after the open. Appreciate it.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Certainly.